Hi, everyone. It's S.J. Thomason, and I'm so glad you're here. Do you got hope? What we're going to talk about today is what a certain group of people have in common. So, when you do not worship the one creator God, Jesus Christ, and the Holy Spirit, the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, you sometimes turn to worshiping yourself as a God. And we've seen that, a lot of that in the last century. And so today I'm going to talk a little bit about what certain gods of this world have as intentions for us. And I'm going to start off by looking at an article written by a member of the World Economic Forum in Forbes magazine, because I think it might interest you to hear some of the items that are in this article. I'm also going to talk a little bit about Klaus Schwab, the World Economic Forum, as I mentioned before, Russia, China, Ukraine, talk a little bit about what those things have in common, what we've seen with the ushering in of communism, and how Russia has spread its airs. So we've definitely seen a lot of that in the past century. And I'm going to also talk about when we knew that was coming and some of the predictions that we saw. So before I turn over to read a little bit of this article to you, I want to say hi to Tom and hi to Susan. Wonderful. Good to see you. All right, so listen to this article. This is from 2016, but it's still something that these people envision. Now, again, these are the world leaders. The World Economic Forum is basically run by a lot of very wealthy people. It was started in 1971 by Klaus Schwab, and they've been sort of these eco-terrorists in a way because they've decided that they are going to put the clamps down on everybody if we don't make certain switches, such as to electric cars. Of course, they ignore little factors like electric cars don't exactly start with zero emissions altogether. The emissions from the car when it's on the road may be zero, but the work that's done to get the car to the road in digging up the batteries and that kind of thing, there is a lot of harm to the environment done with that. But I digress. But they're sort of the eco czars, and some of their ideas have led to some pretty tragic events and food shortages around the world. The Sri Lankan president, a person named Rajapaksa, in April of 21, for example, decided that he was going to not allow people in Sri Lanka to use fertilizers or pesticides. And apparently, about 70% of people who live in Sri Lanka have some sort of dependency, whether it's indirect or direct, on agriculture. And so, unfortunately, when he did that, the crops lost 85%. People over there now are starving and making choices such as which child can I afford to send to school, because I certainly can't afford to send all three. But again, there were other factors that were involved. That was the only reason, but that's a contributor. So listen to this and just think about how this is going to go across for you. Welcome to the year 2030. Welcome to my city, or should I say our city. I don't own anything. I don't own a car. I don't own a house. I don't own any appliances or any clothes. I'll stop for a second. Imagine you're sharing clothes with a bunch of people. Are you sharing underpants? I mean, ugh. It might seem odd to you, but it makes perfect sense for us in this city. Everything you considered a product has now become a service. We have access to transportation, accommodation, food, and all the things we need in our daily lives. One by one, these things became free. So it ended up not making much sense for us to own much. First, communication became digitized and free to everyone. Then, when clean energy became free, things started to move quickly. Transportation dropped dramatically in price. It made no sense for us to own cars anymore because we could call a driverless vehicle or a flying car for longer journeys within minutes. We started transporting ourselves in a much more organized and coordinated way when public transport became easier, quicker, and more convenient than the car. Now, I can hardly believe that we accepted congestion and traffic jams, not to mention air pollution from combustion engines. What were we thinking? Now, when you say no one's going to own anything, I'm just taking a break here for a second. If you say nobody's going to own anything, you're not pulling the wool over our eyes. Somebody owns everything. In this kind of a format, the people at the World Economic Forum who are talking about the environment through one side of their mouth and flying in their private planes to go to Davos, Switzerland every January on the other side of their mouth, these people are the ones who will be owning everything. If you haven't looked into it, Bill Gates has been spending a lot of money buying up U.S. farmland. Why is that? Well, the farmland's what produces the food. And when you can control the food, you control the energy and you control the people. And so you can see some of the problems that are going on right there. Biden has a lot of policies in place that are very destructive to our oil and gas industry. And he is trying to figure out ways to control the energy. He's trying to talk about limitations to automobile manufacturers on how many cars that they can produce with combustion engines. And that is something, again, that could drive us into the dirt. Okay, so here's going back to this article. Sometimes I use my bike when I go to see some of my friends. I enjoy the exercise and the ride. It kind of gets the soul to come along on the journey. Funny how some things seem to never to lose their excitement. Walking, biking, cooking, drawing, and growing plants. It makes perfect sense and reminds us of how our culture emerged out of a close relationship with nature. In our city, we don't pay any rent because someone else is using our free space whenever we do not need it. My living room is used for business meetings when I am not there. Once in a while, I will choose to cook for myself. It is easy. The necessary kitchen equipment is delivered at my door within minutes. Since transport became free, we stopped having all those things stuffed in our homes. Why keep a pasta maker and a crepe cooker crammed in our cupboards? We can just order them when we need them. This also made the breakthrough of the circular economy easier. When products are turned into services, no one has an interest in things with a short lifespan. Everything is designed for durability, repairability, and recyclability. The materials are flowing more quickly in our economy and can be transformed to new products pretty easily. Environmental problems seem far away since we only use clean energy and clean production methods. The air is clean, the water is clean, and nobody would dare touch the protected areas of nature because they constitute such value to our overall well-being. In the cities, we have plenty of green space and plants and trees all over. I still do not understand why in the past we filled all free spots in the city with concrete. Now, here's the interesting thing that I think you might notice. Another thing that Klaus Schwab said, and he said it recently, is he was talking about implanting a device into people's either in their clothes, in their skin, under their skin, or in their brains that would align you with your cell phone and allow the government to track everybody's whereabouts at all times. Now, this idea of no privacy, that's something that they see. They want to track you at all times. If you go over to China, you don't have the property rights that we have here in the United States. One of the only wealth makers for many people in the middle class in the United States is the purchase of a home. It's one of the best ways for a family to save money and then to hand it down to their children. It's one of the best ways to provide for your kids at the end of your life, to accumulate assets, jewelry, things like that you can pass on to your children. This idea of owning nothing is not going to be beneficial for people. But going back to this AI deal, besides the idea that they're going to be tracking you everywhere you go, kind of like China with social credit scores. If the government doesn't appreciate what you're doing, they simply lower your score and inhibit your ability to travel around the country of China. That's what they already do now. So we have the technology where they could be tracking you. And this harkens back to Revelation. But think of another thing with this idea of tracking. Now, what Klaus Schwab has said is that they would somehow be able to read your mind and what you're thinking. And they would also connect you with a robot. And the robot could do all of your manual labor and even think and do your work for you. And all you have to do is you could sit around and eat bonbons all day. Now, if you know anything about the value of work to the human mind, to flourishing and to establishing a sense of purpose, you would reject this idea right away. We need purpose in life. Sitting around eating bonbons all day is not going to be a way to get by. So here's what he said in this article. So Susan is laughing. I see. Yes, I know. No one takes care of anything because no one owns it. So it all goes to crap. That is so true. Yes, absolutely. She said, I study what happens under fascism and under communism and socialism. Not good. Those economic systems never work. Okay, they never work. Some people might say, oh, well, they have a democratic version of socialism up in Sweden and that kind of place. Well, if you can't compare a place that has 10 million inhabitants or Norway with 5 million inhabitants to a country like the United States with 331 million inhabitants. You simply can't do it. The other thing is in Sweden, just so you know, if you're making the equivalent of 60,000 US dollars, you're paying about 60% in taxes. And you don't get to choose your majors if you get accepted into college, although your college will be taken care of. The government chooses majors for you, depending on which majors are needed. But anyway, here's what the article author says. When AI and robots took over so much of our work, we suddenly had time to eat well, sleep well, and spend time with other people. The concept of rush hour makes no sense anymore, since the work that we do can be done at any time. I don't really know if I would call it work anymore. It's more like thinking time, creation time, and development time. For a while, everything was turned into entertainment and people did not want to bother themselves with difficult issues. It was only at the last minute that we found out how to use all these technologies for better purposes than just killing time. My biggest concern is all people who do not live in our city. Now, of course, there will be those people if this sort of ideal went through. There will be people like me who will rebel against this ridiculous system. Ida writes, those we lost on the way, those who decided that became too much, all this technology, those who felt obsolete and useless when robots and AI took over big parts of our jobs, those who got upset with the political system and turned against it. They live different kinds of lives outside the city. Some have formed little self-supplying communities. Others just stayed in the empty and abandoned houses in 19th century villages. Now, why this person is not living in the current century and is living 2 centuries back, I have no idea. But I digress. Once in a while, I get annoyed about the fact that I have no real privacy, nowhere I can go and not be registered. I know that somewhere everything I do, think, and dream of is recorded. I just hope that nobody will use it against me. All in all, it is a good life, much better than the path we were on, where it became so clear that we could not continue with the same model of growth. We had all these terrible things happening: lifestyle diseases, climate change, the refugee crisis, environmental degradation, completely congested cities, water pollution, air pollution, social unrest, and unemployment. We lost the way, too many people, before we realized we could do things differently. What do you think? If you're listening, yikes, yes. No privacy. Imagine. I mean, my parents both jumped off Facebook years ago when they realized that Facebook was pretty much tracking them down. And it's a lot of times, even if you see here, I can see ads running in this particular website that I'm in of places where I'd searched. I was looking at furniture not too long ago, and you probably saw the ad on the side for furniture. It's kind of ridiculous. So let's get back to talk about some of the things that came about. Now, in 1917, a few things happened. In May 13th, 1917, Mother Mary showed up to 3 children at Fatima, and she told them that if Russia's not consecrated to her Immaculate Heart, she gave them a few things that had to happen, or she said, quote, Russia is going to spread its heirs. Well, guess what happened right after that? October 27th, 1917, Lenin declared the Soviet rule. And you know how the USSR came about? Now, Mother Mary also said that the night would be illuminated by an unknown light. She said the First World War was going to end soon, but there would be a Second World War if, again, the world hadn't been converted in a way, and Russia hadn't been converted. Russia was going to spread its heirs. And if Jesus was also suffering from the way that people were down here, so was also feeling very, just upset with the way that people needed to repent. And so what happened that you might not know about is on the date, and you can look this up, September, wait a second, let me get the exact date here for the January 25th, 1938. Here's what the New York Times said. New York Times, Aurora Borealis startles Europe. People flee in fear, call firemen. We saw the Aurora Borealis, this gigantic thing in the sky. It was on my pictured video here. If you look it up, the Aurora Borealis, January 25th, 1938, just preceding World War II, just as Mother Mary said. So here's what happened. It appeared in Canada, Bermuda, Austria, Scotland, Spain, Italy, England, Portugal. It appeared all over the place. And it gave us a big warning. It looked like a gigantic fire. It was like a big red light. And it warned what was to come. Well, guess what? She also said that it would appear that World War II would break out during the reign of Pope Pius XI. So Pope Pius was in power, reigning from 1922 to 1939. The war was from 1939 to 1945. And German troops began marching into the Rhineland starting in 1936, Austria 1938, Czechoslovakia, at the time, that was what it was called, in 1938. So we saw this war coming about. And as you know, what happened? Unfortunately, because of that war, 6 million Jewish people, innocent Jews, were slaughtered under the Nazis. But what a lot of people don't know is what preceded that. Unfortunately, the people of Ukraine have had much suffering. And Ukraine, as you know, was one time part of the whole Soviet bloc. And Putin still thinks that he has some sort of dibs, as you know, on Ukraine. He's called Russia war last year. But the problem is, what you might not know, is the thing called the Holodomor. And what is that? That happened in 1932 and 1933 when Stalin purposely blockaded Ukraine from getting any access to food, and be somewhere between 3.5 and 7 million Ukrainians starved to death. Many of them are so strong today because they suffered so badly, or they have parents or grandparents that told them stories of the suffering so badly. So they're very strong people, and that's why they're fighting back and why they're working so hard to try to defeat Russia, which is busy spreading its airs. So what are some of Russia's other airs? Well, communism is a huge one. And I've spent many videos talking about the communist ideas, what they want to do. They want ugly art, for example. They want to infiltrate the schools, infiltrate the media. They want to spread this idea that there's going to be collective ownership. It's the idea of collectivism versus individualism. Now, if you look around at world maps, the United States, according to Hofstede and other scholars, has the highest levels of individualism, meaning that we're self-sufficient, we have high property rights, lots of innovation. It corresponds to a higher GDP. So high levels of individualism at the country level corresponds to high GDP per capita at the country level. Oh, yeah, Susan's got a blocker. Yeah, that's the Fatima storm. So that's the thing. So higher levels of individualism. Now, where are the collective countries? Well, in Northern Europe, they have very high levels of what they call institutional collectivism, and a lot of social safety nets, cradle to grave, government housing, government supplements, all that kind of stuff. And some of them like that a lot. They don't mind paying super high taxes because of some of the services that they get and the healthcare that they get. And in some other countries, they also have a lot of services in healthcare and high levels of institutional collectivism. China and countries like that, South American countries, African countries, Arab countries, they tend to have higher levels of in-group collectivism and lower corresponding GDP per capita in many of those countries. And this idea of collectivism, it is a good idea to work with other people. Obviously, you want to support your families and you want to help your friends and do things like that. But the way that it was rolled out in both Russia and then eventually spread into China under Mao Zedong is they took away people's property rights. And the idea was not that everyone is going to have collective ownership. That's not what it was. It was that there would be some people in very high levels, like Putin and his cronies, way back when, or going back a while. Russia actually doesn't have technically a communist country anymore, but China still does. And under Xi Jinping, they basically took away many property rights. They gave people plots of land. The people in China said, oh, you can pretend to pay us and we'll pretend to work. It demotivates people when you don't have the outcomes for the inputs you contribute. And that's why communism always fails. The one thing we have going against these systems and these gods of this world is the fact that their economic systems have always failed. They've led to the starvations of millions. 120 million people perished in the last century under China, Pol Pot in Cambodia, and Russia, the USSR. 120 million people. That is a lot. And you can see today, people are starving in Venezuela, which was also, they called themselves socialist, but by really any stretch of the means, it was really communist. The means of production were taken over by the government. And of course, you've got a lot of wealth at the top and over 90% of the population in starvation mode. According to Rand Paul, some of them are eating their pets. Eating their pets. Yeah, I think Russia would now definitely qualify as authoritarian dictatorship. I think Susan's right, definitely. And actually, I would even say if what Jordan Peterson's saying happened to him in Canada, they're basically telling him he has to go through some sort of a re-education process because they didn't like what he says in his tweets. And they're apparently trying to put the hammer down on him. I mean, it seems to me like Canada might, if that is true, and I don't think Jordan Peterson has any reason to lie. If that's true, Canada really isn't any much better than China. The only difference is China has 1.8 million Uyghurs locked up in a concentration camp, and the world's looking the other way. That's the problem. So what happened under this communist system is also this idea of anti-religious views. Under the communist system, guess what? Under Russia in 1920, they were the first country to legalize abortion. And then, of course, that festered into all kinds of other countries. And today, millions of people die. Apparently, it's about 200,000 unborn children are killed each day in the world. All right. In the United States, we've lost 63 million people to these abortions. And around the world, we've lost millions. We lose millions every day. I have the numbers written down here somewhere. I'm trying to find them. So Russia, actually in 2004, Russia had the highest rates of abortion too. So 2004, out of all countries, Russia was the highest at 53.7 per every 1,000 women. And interestingly, Putin realized, and this is similar to China, but Putin realized what a problem this was to be killing off all of their young people. And so now he's created a policy where he wants to halve the rates by 2025, interestingly enough. And China realized that its one-child policy is a big bummer because now there's millions more men in China than women, and prostitutes are becoming more popular because they have no other way to find to satisfy their sexual pleasures, I guess, if you want to call it that. So many of them go get prostitutes because they can't all get married. If you want to try to get married in China as a male, you have to present pretty fancy stuff to the female, maybe try to acquire some goods. So anyway, so China, we've got also has pretty high rates of that. So China had a one-child policy, then it went to a two-child policy. Now it's at a three-child policy because they realize that they need more people. If you grow up in a society where you don't have aunts, uncles, cousins, sisters, brothers. Imagine that. Imagine that. You might have one cousin. Or no, you wouldn't have cousins because you're in this policy for a long time. So be distant, older cousins if you do before the policy came about. But anyway, how does this tie in with the book of Revelation? Well, this World Economic Forum idea and also the one government form idea, the one world government, that goes back to the book of Revelation. And so here's what you see. Yeah, and Susan's saying, JP's first maxim, do not lie if you can help it. Yeah, actually, that's what Solzhenitsyn said. Don't fall for the big lie. It's really important not to fall for the big lie. But Revelation 13 says, and I saw a beast rising out of the sea with 10 horns and 7 heads and 10 diadems on its horns and blasphemous names on its head. So think about that. The 10 horns are like Daniel's 4th beast. Okay, so it's in Daniel 7:7. The body is like a leopard. It says, and the beast that I saw was like a leopard. Its feet were like a bear. Its mouth was like a lion's mouth. And into it, the dragon gave its power and its throne with great authority. Now, this dragon is corresponding to the 4 kingdoms from Daniel. So we've got Daniel's 3rd beast is like a leopard, and that's in Daniel 7:6. Daniel's 2nd beast, is like a bear. That's from Daniel 7:5. And its mouth is like a lion. That's from Daniel 7:4. Now, what did those beasts represent? They represent the 4 kingdoms. Daniel was in the Babylonian kingdom. Then you had the kingdom that followed it, the Medo-Persian kingdom. Then you had Alexander the Great's Greek kingdom. And then, of course, the Roman Empire. And so we've got these 4 kingdoms. So this Revelation verse on the beast is representative of these kingdoms. And so it is a kingdom, and it's given power by the dragon. Who's the dragon? That's Satan. So it's given power by the dragon. And the beast was given a mouth uttering haughty and blasphemous words, and it was allowed to exercise authority for 42 months. It opened its mouth to utter blasphemies against God, blaspheming his name and its dwelling, those who dwell in heaven. Also, it was allowed to make war on the saints and to conquer them. And authority was given it over every tribe and people and language and nation, and all who dwell on earth will worship it. Everyone whose name has not been written before the foundation of the world in the book of life of the Lamb who was slain. If anyone has an ear, let him hear. So you've got that kind of thing. That is supposed to happen in the end times. Now, we're currently in the end times, but Jesus's people during his time were also in the end times. If you go back to the Jewish book, the Sanhedrin, look at 97 and 98, you're going to see that they actually talked about time periods. The time period, and Daniel also said that the anointed one would rise up under the fourth kingdom, which is a Roman Empire. And of course, Jesus rode up in the Roman Empire, and his kingdom will have no end. But that's the kingdom that came from the fourth kingdom in the book of Daniel. But here we have, then I saw another beast rising out of the earth. It had two horns like a lamb, and it spoke like a dragon. It exercises all authority of the first beast in its presence and makes the earth and its inhabitants worship the first beast, whose mortal wound was healed. It performs great signs, even making fire come down from heaven in front of people. And by the signs that is allowed to work in the presence of the beast, it deceives those who dwell on earth, telling them to make an image for the beast that was wounded by the sword and yet lived. Also, it causes all, both small and great, rich and poor, both free and slave, to be marked on the right hand or the forehead, so that no one can buy or sell unless he has the mark. That is the name of the beast or the number of its name. This calls for wisdom. Let no one who has understanding calculate the number of the beast, for it is the number of a man, and his number is 666. Now, like many of the passages in the Bible, the book of Daniel has been fulfilled and is still being fulfilled. So the book of Daniel, it talked about the abomination of desolation, and that's in Daniel 11:31 and 12:11. And of course, much of that was fulfilled, part of that was fulfilled under Antiochus Epiphanes. But then suddenly Matthew 24:15-16 and Luke 21:20-21 also mentioned that there was going to be an abomination of desolation. So there is another one. So then we had the earlier fulfillment of what happened in parts of Revelation under Nero, whose number, if we spell out his name, it comes out to 666. It actually works out to 666. And Nero, as you know, was responsible for Paul and Peter's slaughters, their martyrdoms. Nero was the emperor of Rome at the time in the 60s. And then we had the fall of the second synagogue. So we had the fall of the second synagogue, or the second temple, and that happened in 70 under the Romans, the temple in Jerusalem. Now, in the book of Revelation, it also refers to the temple as if it is still standing. And so the idea is perhaps Revelation was written in the 60s prior to that. I got that idea from Jimmy Akin. And so going back to what's going on today and how we can put this together. So this one world government, the only way that something like that could come about is if people would allow that. Now, in the current society as we are, no one's going to allow that unless you're completely starving and desolate and desperate, as they are in Sri Lanka, as they are in many countries in Russia, right? Russia, actually, many parts of Russia. Same with Ukraine. Their GDP per capita, and in China, is only about $10,000 a year. So it's relatively low. But if you're suffering, you're in places like that. You're in places in Africa, like Yemen or Sudan, or you're in a place like Syria, or Venezuela, or North Korea. If you're in a place like that, you might be willing to succumb to a one world government. And if you have this idea, you can tie this idea with the mark of the beast corresponding to what Klaus Schwab wants to stick in your head, in your brain, a brain chip. And so we have all of this could get put together. So if the World Economic Forum got its way and it united all these governments, and of course, these are the heads of state, these are the people who run that place, are very wealthy people like John Kerry, who fly around on their private jets and win environmental prizes. But they want to put the hammer down on people. And a lot of the stuff that they're proposing is going to end up leading to mass starvation. You may have heard about the Canadian truckers and how their bank accounts were turned off, and how people who donated money to the truckers, their bank accounts also were turned off. Very authoritarian of Justin Trudeau. But maybe you haven't heard as much about what's going on over in Holland. So the farmers in Holland were told that they had to limit their crops, and a number of other practices were put in place. The farmers are protesting, and they're doing a lot of things. They're out there on the roads. They're wreaking havoc over there because it's ruins their businesses. And of course, you starve people when you ruin their businesses. And so you can see this kind of thing creeping in. The idea that the European governments were very highly linked over to Russia through pipeline, and the fact that Russia provides the natural gas to many of the countries in Europe, and the fact that a lot of the nuclear reactors in places like Germany were deactivated. Germany's struggling right now. And the PIGS countries, I know it sounds like a terrible acronym, but it's Portugal, Italy, Greece, and Spain, have kind of been dragging down the EU. So a lot of people have questioned, well, is the EU going to be around for a while? Will we see more examples like Brexit's? What is going to go on? But we see what's going on here is sort of a very intricate system of a lot of issues, a lot of problems. And so that's something I want to say. Nikki, I saw you over at Dr. Brown's channel. I didn't get to say hello because I was about to start this channel, but good to see you. Good to see Susan. It's always good to see everybody. So the UN, here's what the United Nations has forecasted. They said right now, because of Ukraine and the war and the fact that Ukraine is sort of the breadbasket of Europe, right now, 345 million people in the world are at risk of starvation from 82 different countries. All right. So we've got a lot of people at risk of starvation. So when people starve, they say you're 9 meal times away from starvation, pretty much. So when that many people are desperate, and when you have governments in place that are spending like drunk, mad sailors or something, I mean, when you have people spending way too much money that they don't have, that was one of the reasons why Sri Lanka went down as well. That becomes a problem. And so what we have going on here in the United States, some people don't know this. We take in $4 trillion in taxes. When they talk about balancing the budget, they're talking about being able to take care of the debt service and to pay the minimum interest rates and that kind of thing, and to be able to pay for services such as firefighters, policemen, the infrastructure, all that kind of stuff. So they spend, if they balance the budget, it means they take in 4 trillion and they spend 4 trillion. However, we are about 29, I think it's the latest I saw was 29 or 30 trillion dollars in debt. So imagine that. So imagine you're taking 40,000, not we'll say $40. You taking $40 and you're multiples of that in debt. And you can compare that to your own Visa bill. So I'm making $40,000 a year, but yet I've got about $300,000 in Visa debt. I've got problems. And especially when people call on us to pay off the debt or to reduce the debt. And when you've got a government that's decided that it's going to keep spending like crazy. And so that's part of the problem that's going on today with the Congress and with all of these arguments going on. I hate politics and I try not to follow politics too much, but you do have to keep your eye on what's going on or things run amok, like what we saw in Sri Lanka, which is now bankrupt, which is very sad. So anyway, all right. So yeah, is there the other thing that I just wanted to talk about is that we're just we're in a crazy time right now, and I know that everybody kind of follows that kind of stuff, but there still is glimmers of hope in God. And so today is Friday, the first Friday. Tomorrow is the first Saturday of the month. And one practice that I've been doing now is going to church much more often than I used to, like way, way, way more often than I used to. And I think that's a good practice. And so I'm going to go to church tomorrow. And the next day I went today. And I think it's a good deal to do that because that's where you get to take in God and you get to listen to his word and you get to take in the Eucharist. And it's a wonderful thing. So thank you so much, everybody, for coming in. Please like, subscribe, and come again. And just remember, whether you eat, drink, or whatever you do it all for the glory of God. If there's a particular topic you want to cover on here, want me to cover, or you want to come on my channel, I'd love that. I need to have more guests. I want to set up many more dialogues. The other thing I'm going to do is I'm going on a person called Eddie Trask's channel on Tuesday between 2 and 3 p.m. Eastern. And he wants to hear about my reversion to Catholicism. He's got a Catholic revert channel, or recon, I think it's called. So take a look at his channel, go over there, take a look at that. It should be a pretty fun conversation. I listened to a few of his videos and they seem pretty good. So I might try to bring him on my channel. The other thing I wanted to say is I listened to part of Pints with Aquinas today. I don't know if you guys caught that, but I listened to parts of Pints with Aquinas and Eddie Trask, Trask. So I believe that's the last name. But I went to listen to, and he had this person who was an expert in the Shroud of Turin. And the cool thing about that is because all of the recent research that's coming out is lending much more credibility to the authenticity of the shroud. So they found pollen, for example, that was from Jerusalem. They found some other things that were in the shroud, like some of the oils and the other sorts of things in the shroud that's consistent with Jerusalem. They actually were able to map out the way that the shroud made its way through Jerusalem, Constantinople, into Europe. And they even looked at all of the fact that it's 3D on there, that the image is 3D, the image is a perfect likeness of a man. They looked at how many times Jesus had been whipped, which is horrible. It was well over 100 times. And it wasn't just on his back, it was all over his whole body. And they looked at how he was featured. So when he was up on the cross, because his knees were bent, when they actually worked out how he looked in the shroud, his knees were still bent as if, because he had rigor mortis, as if he had been up on the cross. And his arms, which would have been probably like that, they must have pushed him down somehow. And so they did that and buried him. And then a maximal amount of radiation. They figured out the time of the radiation too, because they looked at blood and they looked at when the blood stopped connecting with the thread. And they found that the timing of the radiation, the timing of the resurrection, had to have occurred between 12 and 6 a.m. on the Sunday morning. And they looked, and that's because scientists have been investigating the shroud much more closely. It's really good stuff. So I might do a video on that. I might try to get that guy who was on that channel, that father, to come on my channel. I think he's going on Cameron Bertuzzi's channel too. So definitely spend some time. Now that was a 3-hour video. I didn't see the whole thing, but the part I did see, I could see that the speaker was very, very knowledgeable, and he had a lot of really interesting slides and a lot of good stuff. Yeah, you did see it. Okay, good. So Nikki saw it too. So thank you. So everyone have a great day. Have a great weekend. Enjoy, and I will see you later. Bye-bye.